Hi everyone, this is Holly. In this video I'll be making an indigo powder oil infusion and then using that infusion to create two completely different colors of soap. I'll explain all the details as I go and you'll find the recipe at the end entered into a soap calculator. Soap making involves the use of sodium hydroxide or lye, which can burn your skin and damage your eyes. So be sure to practice lye safe handling procedures during the entire soap making process, even while cleaning up. Be sure to check out the links below to articles and videos on lye safety and beginner soap making. I like to prepare indigo powder a couple of different ways depending on the brand and intensity of the color. In some of my more recent videos, I've used a very fine dark indigo and simply mixed it with a little oil, and that was enough to color large amounts of soap. If I use a lighter colored indigo powder, like the one here from Nurture Soap, I like to make an oil infusion that I'll use to replace a percentage of my recipe oils. To make sure I have plenty of infused oil for these soaps, plus some left over for future projects, I created two identical indigo infusions using 32-ounce mason jars. I added 4 tablespoons of the indigo powder to each jar and then filled them with olive oil to the 24-ounce mark. That amounts to 1 teaspoon of indigo powder for every 2 fluid ounces of oil. There are several ways you can infuse the oil, and I'll leave some links below in case you're interested in reading about those. I really prefer the quicker method of using a hot water bath, but that's mainly because I'm terrible at planning ahead and don't have a lot of patience. I put the jars into a pot of warm water and then placed it on the stove on low for about 2 hours. I don't let the water get hot enough to boil or even simmer. I just make sure it stays hot, and I'll even turn the stove off for a few minutes if I need to. After 2 hours in the hot water, I turned the stove off and left the jars in the water until they were completely cool. I then let the jars sit for 24 hours so all the indigo powder settled to the bottom. I use the same recipe for both soaps, so I'll only show measuring and melting the hard oils and butters this one time. I started by melting the cocoa butter first since it's the hardest. This happened to be some deodorized cocoa butter that I wanted to use up, but you can use regular if you like. Once the cocoa butter was mostly melted, I measured out the coconut oil, lard, and shea butter. I mentioned earlier that I'll list this recipe at the end of this video, and I'll also provide an alternative recipe in case you'd rather not use lard. My recipe oils and butters are fairly light in color. Just keep in mind that darker oils and even your essential oils can affect the color of the finished soap. I've been able to get a pretty sea green colored indigo soap just by using orange essential oil as my fragrance. Once the hard oils and butters were ready for both soaps, I made the pink soap first. After 24 hours, all of the indigo powder had settled on the bottom and my indigo infusion looked quite dark in the jar. But if you look closely, you can see a magenta pink color around the top edge. And as I mentioned earlier, these results will depend on the brand you use. The trick I found to create a pink soap was to not stir or shake the jar in any way before I measure it out, and to make sure all of the indigo powder stayed on the bottom. For this recipe, I replaced all of the olive oil, which was 36% of my entire recipe, with the unstirred, unshaken indigo infused olive oil. Then I measured out the castor oil, which was the only other liquid oil I used. And then finally added the melted hard oils and butters. I waited about 30 minutes or so for the oils and lye to cool down below 100 degrees Fahrenheit and then made the soap. I didn't include the lye preparation in this video, but I'll be sure to list a couple of videos below where I show how I do that in case you're interested. I placed a piece of cardboard on top to protect the soap and then covered the mold in plastic wrap to prevent any fresh air from getting inside during saponification, which can cause a layer of ash to form on top of the soap. I then set the pink soap aside and started on the blue. To get a blue soap from this infusion, I gently rolled the jar around and watched the oil until it looked blue in color. You can see here that most of the indigo powder is still on the bottom of the jar. I'm only trying to pull a little of the fine powder up into the oil. I don't want to shake the jar so much that I get blue specks in the soap. It only takes a few turns and the oil turns a dark navy blue. To get a medium steel blue soap color, I substituted 10% of my total recipe oil weight with the indigo infused olive oil. So for my 1100 gram recipe, I replaced 110 grams of the olive oil with the indigo infused olive oil. I then measured out the remaining olive oil and castor oil, added the indigo olive oil, and finally the melted hard oils and butters. Once the oils and lye had cooled down to about 95 degrees Fahrenheit, I mixed them and made the soap. I did oven process these soaps as I normally do by preheating the oven to its lowest temperature and then turning the oven off and setting the soaps inside. I wanted to make sure the soaps went through gel phase so these pink and blue colors would be a bit bolder in the finished soaps. Since I made 2 batches at once, I could have just wrapped them in a blanket together on the counter and they would have insulated each other and probably gelled just fine, but I used the oven just in case. I removed them from the oven the next day, but left them completely covered on the counter for another 24 hours just to make sure saponification was complete and no ash would form on top of the soap, and also so they'd be hard enough to cut and trim. Since this is a cold process soap, I made sure the top of lye was set to sodium hydroxide or NaOH. My recipe oil weight was 1100 grams. My lye concentration was 35%, which means my lye solution contained 35% sodium hydroxide and 65% distilled water. If you'd rather not use this much of a water discount, you can set this to 33% or 31% instead. This is one of my older soap recipes, and I've always used a 6% superfat, so that's what I used here. My fragrance usage rate was 40 grams per kilogram, or 4%. Once you have all your information entered, you just calculate the recipe and then choose to view or print it. Soap Calc will give you a really nice listing of all your ingredients, including the amount of sodium hydroxide required to saponify your oils. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video, and as always, I hope you found something useful here to help you in your soap making.